Happy Monday, everyone. Meteorologist John Homenuk with Empire Weather here with your latest long-range agriculture video update. Active weekend across the belt. Let's break down where we are and where we've been. Here's the current satellite image as of this afternoon, valid at around 12 o'clock p.m. And it is a fairly quiet day across a large majority of the belt today. You can see most of the area experiencing pleasant conditions. We have a northerly flow component to the wind here. Coming down, but you can see the return flow already coming out of the plains. It is going to be very warm across a large majority of the belt today. That return flow already making its way back up here into parts of Minnesota. The cooler air is really relegated here to the Ohio Valley behind this front. This is the frontal boundary and kind of the remnants here. You can see this little spin in this area of this low pressure system that's shifting off to the north and east. So this is your front right here along the Appalachians, and we'll watch the development of storms across the Carolinas this afternoon and evening. We'll also watch for storms developing in the Dakotas. You see this little low pressure system here that's tracking off to the east. This is a mesoscale system, and we expect storms to begin to form later this afternoon and evening from eastern Montana into parts of the Dakotas. Those will shift off into North Dakota and eventually make their way down into Minnesota tonight. But across the large majority of the belt, it's a great day today. Let's look at the last 30 days of precipitation. I want to get back into this. We've had these storm clusters. This is valid through Sunday, so I want to make that clear. It doesn't include rains on Sunday. We've had these storm clusters, and they've done great work in taking away the edge on this. You can see the areas that are near or slightly above normal as a result of these storm clusters over the last couple of weeks, excuse me. But there's also plenty of areas that are still dry. I want to look at areas of Iowa and southern Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin, central Indiana, down into parts of Kentucky. This area has gotten rain in the last 24 hours, so that'll take the edge off a bit. But this is a longer duration, 30-day period here of below normal precip. Meanwhile, we've seen scattered precipitation here in the southeast U.S. You can see some areas are above normal, and they've actually been too wet, and some areas are below normal in this area as well. The long-term drought area, though, is extending here into parts of the southern plains, the Arlatex region, and into parts of the Ohio Valley. Now, if we change this and we look at the last 14 days percent of normal precipitation, you can see exactly where these storm clusters have been tracking. This is very clear, right? We've talked about this. This has been where your ridge is. So we've had this high pressure, and we've had the air rotating around it. And we've had the moisture come over the top of it from the early monsoon and the Canadian storm track. So it's come down this way into parts of the Ohio Valley and the Midwest. You can see that very clearly. But I think it's important to note that on the 30-day precipitation totals, we still have in longer-term areas that are drier than normal. And that'll be important as we move forward into the next couple of weeks, knowing that we're going to trend drier here in the next 7 days or so. I want to introduce these modified stress degree day maps, and we started talking about these last week. Basically, this is a way to measure how the crop is doing in terms of stress from temperature, and that includes high temperatures, overnight lows, and moisture. And so generally, when we look at values that start to get over 100, over 150, you start to get a crop that is more stressed. And so these are the areas that we're watching here, where we're starting to see the boundary of those more stressed crops start to move northward as a result of that dryness. And it's very clear to see where the drought is, and you can see that expansion occurring a bit here over the last couple of days. Now we can zoom into localized areas, and we can pull up the anomaly. So this is where the stress is higher than it normally is. And the orange colors are the boundary where the crop is a little more stressed than it normally would be this time of year. And this matches up pretty well with the areas that have been impacted by the drought. We've talked a lot about how the concern area, if we were to draw, goes from about eastern South Dakota, Sioux Falls region, down through Des Moines, and then through central and southern Illinois and Indiana. And that's exactly where these stress degree days are telling us that the crop is more stressed than it usually is this time of year. Obviously, we're in dire straits here in southern plains, but you can see that stress expanding a bit northward as well. Let's zoom into the central plains, for example, and you can really see that starting to happen. We have a much more stressed crop than normal in this region, spreading off to the north and east. We back up and we move over to the Midwest region. You can really see that Iowa dividing line that we talked about near Des Moines, where the crop is more stressed to the south and west and less stressed to the north and east. As a result of these storms, that we've had over the last couple of days and weeks. Much of the same here in Indiana. It's okay to the east and parts of Ohio, but Indiana is starting to see more of that stress further to the south and west as compared to areas to the east. And then an area that is forgotten about way too much is actually, I want to pull up this map here instead. An area that's forgotten about way too much is Kentucky and Tennessee. This area has been really dry. If we look at the map, we're seeing stress levels that are starting to increase on the crop. All of this is to say that when we go back and we look at these maps, it makes sense, right? It's been drier than normal for the last 30 days across a large part of this region here, into parts of Indiana and Illinois and parts of Ohio, but also down into western Kentucky and Tennessee, and all of this expanding out from the southern plains into this region. Don't forget about the northeast either, well below normal in terms of precipitation. So what does this mean for our pattern, and where is the pattern going from here? So the first thing I want to do is I want to discuss where we are as of today. So right now, the ridging is centered much further west than it has been really at any time during the year. And there's a reason why this is happening and why we think this will continue. Here's the center of the ridge, right? Earlier this spring and then early summer, the ridge was centered over here, and that has led to a lot of that dry area developing. That was really one of the major reasons why it occurred at all. And recently, we've seen this ridge start to shift back to the west. And so what's going to happen with that, and what does it mean? Well, for the next 7 days, that ridge is still far enough east and still turning over some pretty substantial warmth. Let's look at the next several days of temperatures, and you can see that warmth really start to take hold here across the Midwest. This is valid midweek. Temperatures are way above normal here. That expands up into the Midwest and the Ohio Valley. And that is really, really substantial warmth. It's not just a couple degrees above normal. If we zoom in and look at what this means for a large majority of the central U.S. and the Ohio Valley, I want to pull up the actual ensemble forecast temperatures. And for example, your overnight lows Tuesday into Wednesday morning are in the mid-70s across parts of the Midwest and Ohio Valley, getting up into the mid and upper 70s and 80s in some areas. And you can see that this warmth really starts to expand here into parts of the Ohio Valley as well. These overnight lows are not friendly, obviously, and this is the kind of warmth that is very substantial. So I guess when we look at this week and we see these temperature anomalies looking like they do, it's worth noting that this is expansive warmth through this week as a result of the positioning of that ridge overall. So backing up and looking at the United States and what's happening here, that ridging is pretty far west, and it looks like it's going to stay there. So what's causing this ridge to move back west, right? And is it going to stay there enough so that we start to get some more momentum into the pattern and can bring these troughs down? Let's go back and look at the sea surface temperatures. We've talked about this for really quite a bit of time. And what's happening is we still have La Nina cranking. These trade winds are still pushing these colder waters into the tropical Pacific Ocean. And this feedback process is still directly impacting the pattern in the Pacific and eventually the Americas as well. We do have cooler waters here off the coast of South America still, and some warmer water here in the eastern equatorial Pacific, but that's just more a function of some upwelling with warmer temperatures just beneath the surface. The key to all of this, that's what's been going on, is the change in the pattern north of Hawaii and off the coast of North America. I'm going to back this up, and I want to look at what the pattern was like in the spring in late May. So here's your configuration. Knowing how these feedback processes work, we know that warm waters here and cool waters here are going to lead to a ridge developing in this region and a trough developing in this region, which then encourages ridging in this general vicinity. So let's draw that wave pattern again. A trough northeast of Hawaii, a ridge northeast of Hawaii, a trough off the coast of the Americas, and then another ridge in this area, right, in the central United States. And that's where all that dryness started to develop. Now, let's roll this forward and look to what we're seeing now. Look at how much this pattern has retrograded. We now have warmer waters off the coast of North America. Your troughing axis is here, your colder air, and the ridging has backed up to an area north and west of Hawaii. So that changes the configuration to look like this. We have a ridge in this region, a trough in this region, and then the ridging will then redevelop further west into this area. So you've taken your ridge and you've moved it from the Ohio Valley, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and you've backed it up to the Four Corners region. And that is a major, major change to the pattern. And your sea surface temperature anomalies here are telling you exactly what is going on with this weather pattern. This is a major focus moving forward. So, European ensemble, says that as we move through the next couple of days, we're going to see exactly that pattern develop. Let's back up. Look at North America. Your ridging is centered in the Four Corners region, and you start to really, you're going to see the warmth begin to shift into that area as well as we move into early August, late July and early August. And that's going to allow this Gulf of Alaska or Alaskan low to spit off disturbances that will then drop down into the Great Lakes and into the Northeast states. And you can see that pattern really developing here through the extended. Let's roll the European ensemble all the way forward and look at the pattern that develops here through late July and early August. And so all that talk and all that concern about this massive ridge taking over the United States, we've been very adamant that it never really made all that much sense. And now we're seeing that ridging end up here in the Four Corners region and push further north and west. And so that allows your troughing anomaly to begin to develop here in the Great Lakes and the eastern United States. And you can see that pattern really continuing. This is valid now for early August on the European model. And your ridging is pushing even further west now into parts of Nevada and Utah as that ridge starts to develop in this general region. So from a temperature profile perspective, what that means is the model is showing that ridging pushing the worst of the warmth all the way up here into the Canadian prairies and into parts of the northwestern plains, while you get a bit of a cooler flow down here into the Great Lakes. Now, it's not necessarily going to be below normal. I want to be very clear about that. However, at least from the last couple days of July into early August, it looks like we will see more of a northwesterly flow as opposed to a very hot southwesterly flow. And that should also begin to introduce some precipitation chances, because when you look at what's happening with the pattern here, you have two ridges that are developing. And I want to point out the importance of that. Not only do you have one in the Four Corners, but you have another one in the Western Atlantic. This is called a Western Atlantic Ridge, or a WAR. And so when this develops, here's Bermuda, west of Bermuda, what happens is you get a clockwise flow. The flow around ridges is always clockwise. So it'll come around this way, and then it'll come this way, and then it will come this way. And this flow into the eastern United States and eventually parts of the Ohio Valley is pulling air right out of the Caribbean into this general vicinity over time. And that's going to reintroduce the chances for moisture. Let's look at the European and we'll see exactly that happen, right? If we roll this forecast forward, as that ridge strengthens and develops, all of a sudden the ensemble is noticing that there's going to be more moisture across the eastern United States. And that's all a function of the flow around the Western Atlantic ridging during that time frame. Now, in addition to that, we're likely going to see the chance for precipitation across the central United States continue. Let's zoom back into that. Here's your ridge centered in the Four Corners, but despite the ridge being there, if we look at the moisture forecasts, the models are suggesting that there's still going to be moisture in this reservoir that's built up in the Four Corners from that early monsoon. So this moisture is going to come over the top here. And guess what? Your flow is going to encourage these Canadian disturbances to come down, catch that moisture, and possibly produce storm clusters throughout the upper Midwest during that time frame. You can see the upper level flow encouraging that here. Again, we remember that moisture plot. That comes over the top, your disturbances come down, and this is your area where you're going to look at moisture chances, possibly even being fed further by the moisture from that Western Atlantic ridge in this entire general vicinity during the very late July and into early August timeframe. The models are in very good agreement about that. Again, if we look at precipitation departures and we look at the 5-day anomalies, you can really see that evolve. There's a couple of storm cluster chances here that begin to develop into early August. You can see it clearly here. And then as we move further, you can see that those storm clusters continuing. Again, with this moisture reservoir here, the models are likely missing out on some of these clusters coming over the top. This is generally a pattern that should offer some opportunity for moisture. In terms of concern areas, again, we mentioned the areas that have been drier than normal. That includes areas like eastern Nebraska, western Iowa, Indiana, and Illinois. I want to just note, before we wrap this up today, if we look at the 15-day anomalies, or actually, let's use the 10-day anomalies, the area that I would say it remains most concerning, obviously the Southern Plains goes without saying that it's the most concerning area, but I do still have some concern that the dryness will extend up into areas like Nebraska, west central Missouri, and western Iowa. This area has missed on a bunch of storm opportunities, and it's possible that they will miss again if the alignment of this is just slightly off. Right now, it looks like the moisture will come over the top here, right into this area. However, all it will take is a slight adjustment for it to come over the top and again miss this region, and that would be concerning, as it would be the moisture would again miss this region during a very critical time in mid to late July, especially with later than normal pollination. So I just want to keep an eye on that region. This is the area that I'm a little concerned about. They've missed out on some rain, and we need to verify these rains here moving forward in the storm clusters. Again, we're dry for the next several days as we just review the highlights. We're dry for the next several days. You can see this drier than normal pattern. We have a Canadian storm track here into the northeast United States through pretty much the end of this week. Then we get some storm clusters returning. Models are in good agreement on that. This is from this weekend into early next week. You can see those storm clusters coming back. A lot of that is a function of the ridge moving far enough west by the end of July that we're introducing troughing here into the Great Lakes and Northeast states. And then as we move forward into late July and early August, we see the moisture expanding from the western Atlantic ridge, moving up into parts of the Ohio Valley. And we should also see some additional storm clusters coming over the top of that ridge as well. Temperatures remaining at least slightly above normal after the big heat this week, but we should get more moisture in from late July into early August. We will have a lot more for you this week. Obviously, the European Weekly is coming out tonight. We'll have some updates on that, and then we'll keep you updated on any changes throughout the week with long-range videos continuing every day, Monday through Friday, and Sunday as needed. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here 24/7 to help you guys and provide as much consulting as we can to guide you through this critical time frame. For now, that's all from us. Have a great Monday. We'll talk to you soon.